I'm Jarrad Brown, Australian expat financial planner based here in Singapore. Welcome to my video series where we tackle the tough personal finance questions asked by Australian expats. Today, I'm going to walk you through which debts you should pay off first. Now, a lot of us will have heard bad debts, good debts, and hopefully most of us will know exactly what they mean. But when working out which debts to actually pay off first, it can be a little more challenging. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through some of the common debts and why you may want to consider paying them off first. So let's get into it. Now, the first step when it comes to actually getting on top of your personal debts is to make a list, outline exactly how much you owe, what the interest rate is, and when that interest is going to start to apply if it hasn't done already. By that I mean some credit cards will offer interest-free periods. You may be on an interest-free loan with Harvey Norman or another retailer that you've bought some furniture or electronics from. So be sure to outline that and have a clear outline of exactly what your debts are. We can then start to rank them. So let's work out which debts we're going to tackle first. The first debt that we want to get rid of is always our credit cards. Now, if you're somebody who pays off your credit card balance every month, and I'm not talking about minimum repayments, I'm talking about clearing everything, then there's no issue here, because it's highly likely you're not actually paying any interest, and chances are you're using the credit card to accumulate points. However, if you're in the category of wondering how on earth you maxed out your credit card and how on earth you're going to repay it, then it's time for some action. What you can consider doing is consolidating your debt onto another credit card, which may offer you an interest-free period and allow you to start making regular repayments. Interest rates on credit cards are often north of 10%, and in fact, many of them are above 20%. And these interest rates are very high for a number of reasons, not least of which is because fraud is so high. Now, if you're somebody who's accumulated a lot of credit card debt, it's time to have a clear action path of exactly how and when you're going to have this repaid by. And once you've got it repaid, it's time to chop it up, throw it in the bin, and ignore all of the requests for new credit cards from various banks. The second bad debt that we often want to get rid of quickly are store loans. Now, these are the loans that you go and buy a couch or fridge or other household item, and they offer you X months interest free. It might be 12 months, it might be 24, it might even be 5 years. For those of us that have been around long enough, you may remember the good old days where we could go into Harvey Norman, buy a bedroom suite for X $1,000 and have 5 years interest free. And it was often something that we wouldn't think about again until we got to that 5-year mark. However, what also happens is that if we're late, even by a day, that interest rate that applies or penalties that are charged are very, very high. So if you do have these store loans, make sure that you've got a clear path to be saving, putting that money away so that you can repay it as soon as it falls due. The third debt that we may want to think about getting rid of fairly quickly are family loans. Now, this is often considered a bad debt because it's generally not tax deductible, but how quickly we want to repay it is going to depend on A, how quickly we want to repay our family, and B, of course, how quickly they want to be repaid. So this is one that can often cause tensions within family, and particularly if it's something that you've taken on from your family and your partner may be less comfortable with it. So you may want to have a clear path, make sure that you've agreed upon some terms with your family to extinguish that debt. The fourth debt to get rid of is personal loans. Now, within this, I would include Afterpay, Zip Pay, Never Pay, all of these buy now, pay later schemes that have come up at a rate of knots over the last couple of years. Start getting rid of them quickly. They're 9.5 times out of 10 going to be bad debts because they're often used for discretionary items, personal items, holidays, clothing, whatever it may be. Get rid of them quickly because chances are the interest rates are still going to be very high. They won't necessarily be as high as your credit card, but they'll still be quite a high rate. So make sure that we get rid of them quickly. The fifth debt to think about getting rid of are any tax debts. Now this could be to the Australian tax office, or it could be to a tax office in another country that you reside in, or potentially even a country that you don't reside in but have a tax bill owing. Now when it comes to the ATO, late payments will often incur penalties and potentially even interest. So make sure that you stay on top of these and get them cleared as quickly as you can. Now, the 6th, 7th and 8th debts are what we would typically consider good debts. Now by that I mean they're either tax deductible or they form part of our overall personal financial strategy to achieve our financial objectives. Number 6 that we at least want to have a plan to stay on top of is any business loans. Now that may be for our commercial office, our commercial business premises, it may even be invoice financing, cash flow financing, whatever it may be to help our business achieve its own objectives. Make sure that we're staying on top of this and that we're not being charged unnecessary interest. Number 7 is our home loan. Now by home loan, this is not to be confused with loans on investment properties. I'm purely talking about any debt attached to our primary residence. This is typically not tax deductible, and even though interest rates are at record lows at the moment, owner-occupier rates now are below 2% in Australia, but it's a good idea to make sure that we're regularly repaying this loan and that we can get rid of it in a reasonable time frame. It's also important to recognise that interest rates are not going to stay at these record low levels forever. So if you are looking at buying your home, refinancing, be sure to look at long-term average interest rates rather than just where they're sitting today. The 8th one, as I mentioned, is typically considered the best debt. Now that doesn't mean you must go out and get it, it's just typically considered the most efficient. And this is investment debt. So for those of us that are Australian expats, this is often going to be loans or mortgages attached to our investment property or properties back home in Australia that are generating rental income. And often that debt will be tax deductible. If we're residing in Australia, this could even be loans secured by equities, considered margin loans. And if that's used to generate income in the form of dividends, interest or otherwise, it may also be tax deductible. Now while it is tax efficient, it is important to stay on top of. Make sure that you've got an attractive interest rate, refinance if you need to, and make sure that you're claiming all of your legitimate tax deductions. The 9th and final debt is your student loans. Now this is commonly referred to as HECS or HELP debt in Australia, and this is particularly important for Australian expats. Because if you are earning money overseas above the thresholds, which you can find online in the links we'll provide in the notes, it's important that you declare your worldwide income each year if you do have a HECS or student loan back in Australia, and that you make the minimum repayment required. You may even want to get rid of this debt entirely, although the interest rate that applies is typically going to be very low. So if you do have student debt, or you're not quite sure what the balance may be sure to check with the ATO, check your records and make sure that you're making the repayments required. Now I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's shed some light on which debts you should be tackling first. Celebrate them along the way as you do get rid of them. Don't take on debts that you're not comfortable with. And as always, seek advice from your accountant and your financial planner and make sure that you're on top of your own household debts. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have anything to add or you have any questions that we haven't yet covered, fire them through. We'd love to hear from you and maybe we can even turn them into a future video. Thank you again for tuning in and I look forward to seeing you next time.